Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Brown. I'm a special education teacher in Oakland, California, a writer for the World Socialist website, and a member of the Socialist Equality Party. We're at about 100 attendees right now, with more coming in as we speak. And I see a very broad geographic representation. I see people from New York, Chicago, Alabama, Germany, Britain, as well as certainly California. This is going to be a meeting on really building educators' rank and file committees to force the shutdown of schools, to prevent the spread of the pandemic, to really oppose the effort to throw everything open and let the pandemic rip. So with that, I would like to toss things over to Evan.
All right, thank you, David, for that introduction, and welcome everyone to today's meeting. We are now at the worst stage of the pandemic globally. More than 3,000 people have died from COVID-19 in the US every day this month, amounting to over 93,000 human lives lost in the US alone. Internationally, this figure stands at 386,000 dead in January, an average daily death rate of 12,800 people and climbing. By the end of today, more than 450,000 people will have died in the US from COVID-19, and over 2,230,000 worldwide, including over 530 teachers in the US alone. The ruling elites in all the advanced capitalist countries and dozens of other countries globally have pursued the homicidal policy of herd immunity, letting the population get infected and doing as little as possible to prevent the spread of the virus. This slide shows the 7-day rolling average for the number of daily new cases worldwide, which gives a picture of the current level of spread of the pandemic globally. As a result of the pursuit of herd immunity, seroprevalence studies indicate that roughly 1/3 of the US population has already been infected with COVID-19, which is far higher than the official figure, which stands at about 8%. Scientists have warned for months that the more that the virus spreads, the more it changes, and the more that it changes, the greater possibility that it will evolve and become less susceptible to vaccines and thus more dangerous. The new strain from South Africa confirms this warning. Johnson & Johnson's single-dose vaccine was only 57% effective at preventing moderate and severe cases of COVID-19 in South Africa, compared to being 72% effective in the US. Other vaccines are indicating similar results. The logic of the situation is that the new, more infectious variants threaten to vastly expand the spread of the pandemic, further saturating hospitals beyond their capacity and leading to new, more infectious, and deadlier variants that are more resistant to the vaccines. On top of this, a growing number of children are becoming infected and dying from the virus. On the left of this slide are 2 children who have died from COVID-19. On the top left is a 5-year-old in Detroit who died last April, and in the bottom is a 9-year-old in Fort Worth, Texas, who died just this week. And on the right is a screenshot from the website Earth Felt the Wound, which is being conducted, organized, and curated independently, and shows biographical sketches of many of the educators who have died as a result of school reopenings. And just in the past year, since the start of the pandemic, over 2.7 million children have now tested positive for COVID-19 in the US, which has coincided with the steady reopening of schools throughout the fall. Over 100 children have now died, including at least 37 in Texas alone. And a growing number of children are also suffering from multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children, MISC, whose lifelong effects are not fully understood. Now, this subjective situation makes it all the more urgent to take far-reaching measures to contain the pandemic. Mass global vaccination campaigns must be combined with the immediate closure of all schools and non-essential businesses in every country where the virus is spreading. The most irrational and backwards measure to take at this stage of the pandemic would be to reopen schools and businesses. But that's exactly what Biden and the entire political establishment are doing in the interests of the financial oligarchy. Now, in 2020, Trump was the most blatant politician to pursue herd immunity, speaking for the most ruthless and reactionary sections of the ruling class. But he was supported by the Democrats at every level, and politicians of every stripe have implemented the same policies globally. Biden has now taken up this mantle, and over the past week in particular, it's already become clear that his administration is now spearheading the drive to reopen schools. In doing so, Biden has the full support of the teachers' unions at the national, state, and local level. AFT President Randy Weingarten and NEA President Becky Pringle met with Jill Biden the day after the inauguration. The photo on this slide is on the right is from that meeting. And the unions, the union heads have continuously endorsed Biden's statements, his executive orders on school reopenings, and his pandemic plan, which, if you read carefully, is really, the central purpose of his pandemic plan is to reopen schools and businesses as quickly as possible. The document notes the word, it uses the word reopen 130 times. I believe the phrase reopen schools appears 10 times, and the word lockdown does not appear anywhere in the document. And the claim, which this document and all the pronouncements by Biden and the union heads, that schools can be reopened safely, which has also been really heavily promoted by the corporate media, is completely unscientific. And as we've seen on social media and in reports that we've published on the World Socialist website, there's enormous opposition to these homicidal policies. This has been expressed most sharply in Chicago, where the fight by educators to prevent the reopening of schools has become a major focal point of the class struggle in the US. We'll hear a report from an educator in Chicago later, but it's important just to note that Chicago has been run by the Democratic Party for roughly the past century. And Democratic Mayor Lori Lightfoot and Chicago Public Schools CEO Janice Jackson have been ruthlessly spearheading the campaign to reopen schools there for the past month. And the Chicago Teachers Union, which is fully integrated with the Democratic Party, has sought to maneuver with the Lightfoot administration every step of the way. They did nothing to mobilize their membership to halt the reopening of schools beginning on January 4th, when pre-K and cluster teachers were first sent back in waves. And they only called a strike authorization vote 3 weeks after these reopenings began, when they were essentially facing an incipient rebellion by rank and file teachers. There was growing opposition at the union membership meetings. And it was only after that that they finally held this authorization vote. They did nothing to mobilize the enormous opposition to the blocking out of teachers who were denied access to their Google Classroom accounts and denied the ability to teach remotely. At present, the negotiations between the CTU and CPS are currently stalled, but the district remains adamant that K-8 students and teachers will be sent back to schools on Monday. And I think it's critical to stress that really the resistance of Chicago educators is seen as a threat by the entire ruling class, because reopening schools is really the linchpin to the campaign to reopen the broader economy and to compel parents to return to unsafe workplaces. And the bourgeoisie, the ruling class, is acutely aware of the growing militancy among educators, and they're doing everything that they can to vilify teachers and to distort science. And I think that the term gaslighting doesn't even do justice to what's currently happening. What we're seeing now is really a massive propaganda campaign involving the entire corporate media and the political establishment, both Democrats and Republicans at every level. Just in the past week, there have been dozens of right-wing articles denouncing Chicago teachers in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, all the outlets in Chicago and just across the country, USA Today, and in the the broadcast media, in particular on Monday and Tuesday, there was a deluge of really right-wing propaganda denouncing teachers. And on Tuesday, I think what developed was very significant, and it was very clearly a choreographed release of the CDC reports, which claimed that schools can be reopened safely. And one was based on a study of 17 schools in rural Wisconsin, and Dr. Mateus will speak on this further, but they're they were immediately picked up by the broadcast and print media to spin this narrative that it's safe to reopen schools. And it's very much a coordinated effort to try to stultify the opposition that exists among educators across the country. And I think it's important to stress that the reason that Chicago has taken on such enormous significance, that they feel compelled to write these dozens of slanders against teachers, is because it's the third largest district in the U.S. where educators have openly defied the Democratic Party. And so what they're trying to do is to really set a precedent in Chicago in order to facilitate the implementation of Biden's plan to reopen schools everywhere. And beyond Chicago, there's a concerted effort to to get students and teachers back into buildings in every major school district in the U.S. In addition to Chicago, 3 of the 11 largest school districts in the country are also pursuing reopening, including in Los Angeles, Las Vegas, and Fairfax County, Virginia. And just to refresh everyone's memory, the largest school district in the country, New York City, really set the precedent for this in the fall, really becoming the first major Democrat-led city to reopen. And this was followed in October by Houston, which is also run by the Democrats, the 7th largest school district. And they were attempting to reopen Los Angeles schools, but they were essentially compelled or forced not to in December, when the city became the epicenter for the pandemic. But just on Wednesday, LA County Public Health Department Director Barbara Ferrer declared that the district's elementary schools could reopen in 2 to 3 weeks if the daily infection rates continue to decline, which is just absolutely insane. It's still a crisis situation in Los Angeles, throughout Southern California, and throughout that entire region and the rest of California. And in addition to LA and the Clark County School District, which covers the Las Vegas metropolitan region and is the 5th largest school district in the U.S., just recently reached a deal with the Clark County Education Association, which the school board approved on January 14th. They're currently on track to send pre-K through 3rd grade teachers back into classrooms on February 22nd. With students then returning the following week, roughly a month from now. In Fairfax County in Virginia, which is the 11th largest school district in the country, they've also been pressing to reopen in recent weeks. And the current goal by the superintendent is to send students back into class 2 weeks from now on February 16th, with the goal of having 100,000 students across multiple grades back in class by March 9th. And it's critical to stress that if this drive to reopen these 4 major districts, Chicago, LA, Clark County, and Fairfax, along with other large districts in Maryland and North Carolina, then essentially by mid-March, the 17 largest school districts in the U.S. would be offering in-person learning. And this is really they're doing this to set a precedent in each of the states to say that we can reopen, and this will lay a pattern for hundreds of other smaller districts to reopen across the country. And the science makes clear that this really conspiracy that's being orchestrated primarily by the Democrats and the unions would vastly accelerate the spread of the pandemic and really have devastating consequences for the working class. And these are policies which we characterize as social murder. and we cannot negotiate with the forces, the class forces, the political representatives that are orchestrating this. And I think it's important to stress that we're far beyond the point where we can look at this pandemic solely as a medical issue, and really fundamentally it's a political crisis and a social crisis that has to be resolved by the working class. I also just wanted to stress, really the connections between the pandemic, the policies pursued by the ruling class, and the growth of fascism, which are very organically connected. And it's important to recall that early on in the pandemic, Trump and his supporters, mobilized far-right organizations and armed militias to storm state capitals in Michigan, Minnesota, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and other states. And their central demand was to put an end to lockdowns and any public health measures that undermined business activity. And these efforts really culminated in the January 6th fascist coup attempt at the US Capitol, which aimed at overthrowing the elections and maintaining dictatorial powers for Donald Trump. And in his inaugural address 10 days ago, which was just an endless series of empty platitudes, really the central theme that emerged was Biden's call, and which has since been really repeated ad nauseum, is Biden's call for unity, by which he meant unity with the Republican Party, which is increasingly becoming an openly fascistic party. And in response to this plea for unity, the Republicans have responded by uniting behind Trump. And just this week, there was a motion by Kentucky Senator Rand Paul to essentially quash the impeachment of Trump. And this had the support of 45 of 50 Republican senators. And every day, there are further revelations about the scale of the conspiracy to carry out the January 6th coup, which involved the Trump family, the majority of the Republican Party, sections of the Capitol Police and the Pentagon, and the mobilization of fascist neo-Nazi groups such as the Boogaloo Boys, the Proud Boys, and other really far-right fascistic organizations. And I think it's important to stress that we're really in the midst of an historical crisis in American and world capitalism. Biden has repeatedly stated that he accepts as inevitable that another 170,000 to 230,000 people will die, which would bring, if that were to happen, that would bring the total death toll in the U.S. To the level reached during the Civil War, which was the bloodiest, deadliest conflict in U.S. history. And just given the new variants and the increased likelihood that they'll be resistant to the vaccines, it's entirely possible that the death toll could surpass 1 million unless the working class intervenes. So I think just in this context, it's really important to stress that the only way the pandemic can be brought under control is when the working class intervenes to put an end to this madness. And really, the opposition of teachers has to become part of a broader movement of workers to save lives in the US and internationally. We'll hear from speakers in the UK and Germany, but really the same homicidal policies are being pursued on every continent, from Europe to South America, Africa, and Asia, and really, throughout the world. And the working class is a massive force in American and world society, and really the power of our rank and file committees, the network of committees that we've established in the U.S. And internationally, is really that we are oriented towards the working class, towards this really powerful social force, and we recognize that only when the working class consciously organizes itself and really mobilizes this opposition, will there be a major shift in the coming period. And I think it's critical that all of our committees really be as active as possible, I know, conditions are horrible. It's incredibly draining to be teaching right now. It's exhausting, but really, it's a life and death question, and the actions that we take now have the tremendous possibility to change the political situation and to really turn the tide in this pandemic and put an end to these policies. And I think so we have to be very active. We have to turn out to different sections of the working class, fight to unify educators across district and state lines, and really begin widely discussing and preparing for a nationwide general strike. And this isn't going, this doesn't just happen automatically, but it will only happen through struggle and through the active intervention of workers. But I think it's, and I know there's also, there can be a tendency to somewhat take a pessimistic approach towards the possibilities that exist and to overemphasize certain backward conceptions that do exist among some workers, sections of the middle class. But I think it's important to always bear in mind and to really be focused on the fact that there is a tremendous radicalization that's taking place within the working class. And we are approaching really a tipping point where there will be mass interest in these committees in building organizations of struggle and really preparing for broader struggles. And I think that at this point it's really critical that we prepare for that. We prepare for mass movements of the working class and be able to lead these struggles to successful conclusion. And so I think the purpose of our rank and file committees is really to serve as a force of opposition to the union bureaucracies, to create a framework for educators and all workers to be able to exert their own independent interests, and really to serve as organs of working class democracy and a voice for all workers. And the unions will do everything they can to negotiate to reopen schools, to reopen businesses. But we have to be firm that we will not accept that. And we will, adamantly oppose any effort by the unions to enforce these homicidal policies. And just as we speak, the CTU is currently negotiating with CPS to reopen schools. They've said that repeatedly, that they want to come to an agreement. They want to phase in teachers. And we really have to, in Chicago and everywhere across the country, Alabama, Texas, California, Michigan, New York City, everywhere we have these committees, Tennessee, Pennsylvania, Utah, Washington, Oregon, every state, we have to build up this opposition. We have to issue public statements denouncing the policies and the actions of the unions and the politicians, and really become that pull of attraction for the working class to oppose these policies. That's the only way that we will be able to stop this pandemic. And I think we just really have to face reality and understand that the brutality of the ruling class is limitless. They've shown that in the US and every country. They're trying to, essentially kill another, 100, 200,000 people. It could go above 1 million, and that would mean nothing to them. And, in fact, for them, as more workers die, they see that as a positive good. That reduces the pension and healthcare obligations that they have to pay. And, if there's a report that 1 million workers could die in the coming months, the stock market would go up. That's happened throughout the pandemic. It's just been a continuous rise. And I think in the face of this ruthlessness, this really brutality by the ruling class, we have to be just as determined to fight in the interests of science, in the interests of the working class. And I think, just to close, I think it's important to really build our rank and file committees on highly principled foundations. We have to maintain our independence from the Democrats and Republicans who are completely impervious to the needs of the working class. And we have to be oriented towards every other section of workers, not appealing to the powers that be. We can't be writing letters to the Democrats, to Biden. We can't be organizing protests, marches to appeal to Democratic governors or local mayors or the school board. We have to be fighting to unite with auto workers, with healthcare workers, Amazon workers, every other section of the working class, and really, build up the broadest movement possible to prepare for a general strike. So again, I just urge everyone on this call, if you're not already involved, send us your contact information, sign up at wsws.org/edsafety, and build a rank and file committee in your school or workplace and begin organizing this opposition, which exists everywhere. So thank you.
Thank you, Evan. I would like to encourage everyone who is attending this, make sure you have gone to wsws.org/edsafety. That website should be on your screen. This is where you register, where you give us your contact information, where you sign up for newsletters, where you let us know that you want help building rank and file committees. We'll put you in touch with other educators in your area. If there is a rank and file committee, if there isn't, we will help you build one. There have been some questions on organizing this, and we'll have a contribution on that a little later in this meeting. But for now, I would like to call on some of the international attendees. I believe we have Tanya, an educator from Britain. Tanya, go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, quite well.
Great. Oh, well, thank you very much for inviting me to your meeting tonight, the Growing Educators Rebellion and the Fight Against the Pandemic. I want to first salute the struggle of the Chicago school teachers in their steadfast opposition to the reopening of schools, and in particular the statement that was just made. The issues that are confronted there certainly resonate in the experiences of workers and educators in the UK. I mean, I think educators are all too familiar with the risks that they confront on a daily basis with the most minimal protection, but they also recognise that schools are a major vector for the transmission of the disease, and the campaign to keep schools shut will protect the communities in which educators work and the working class as a whole more broadly. And from that standpoint, it is a very brave and courageous struggle that they are taking up. And I think it is for this reason, really, that the fight to close schools must reach out and win support of the broader sections of the working class in a united programme of action to protect lives. The Chicago teachers and others across the US, and we've heard from Alabama, who are fighting to oppose face-to-face teaching, must draw the lessons of their own bitter struggles against the education unions, who have been complicit in the government's agenda of protecting profits over lives, and the lessons of educators internationally. I think the commonality of the issues confronted and the very bitter experiences with the bankrupt and nationalist programs of the unions have led the working class quite literally to a dead end. The lessons of the educators in the UK, the birthplace of the trade unions, are very crucial in your struggle, if your struggle is to go forward. Now, last Monday, just under a week ago, the UK reached the grim milestone of 100,000 deaths, and more than 30,000 people have died in January thus far. There are an average of 1,200 deaths per day. The UK has the highest per capita death rate in the world, and 1 in 7 of all COVID deaths in Europe have taken place here. This is not accidental. It was Boris Johnson's government that first launched the criminal and reactionary social policy of herd immunity, and the governments the world over have adopted this regressive strategy with the most devastating and tragic consequences. Now, as Johnson announced this horrendous milestone, he also began to reveal his plans to sacrifice yet more lives on the altar of corporate profits. He revealed plans for what he called a roadmap to reopen the economy more broadly from February the 22nd, with the reopening of schools on Monday, 8th of March as the very key element of his strategy. Now, all schools were fully reopened from September 2020, with no social distancing, no PPE or protection for vulnerable staff or children. And it was this act which enabled the uncontrolled spread of the virus and the circulation of the new variant, which was known about for several weeks but suppressed. As children became the key vector of the virus, with 75% of infections all in the new variant, the government still refused to close schools despite mass growing opposition. Now, the new variant is 30% more deadly than the first. However, with the virus spiraling out of control and some 20,000 educators forced to isolate on one single day on December the 16th due to either being infected or in close contact with someone who had been infected, the government was forced to announce the closure of secondary schools and some primary schools in the south and in London, where rates of infection had reached to 1 in 32. The government refused, however, to extend the closures to all schools across the country, and this was met with growing anger and hostility. Some 400,000 members of the National Education Union attended a mass online meeting demanding protection on January the 3rd. Tens of thousands of teachers refused to turn up to work the following day on January the 4th across primary schools under Section 44 of the Workplace Safety Regulations. It was in response to this action of educators that the lockdown was then announced that very same evening. The unions, who were totally compromised throughout the pandemic in their refusal to organise any action in defence of their members, have now attempted to posture as defenders of the well-being of staff. This pretense has been very short-lived, however. Having diverted the anger away from strike action and an independent campaign of workers, they are now supporting the government's efforts to lift the lockdown and to reopen schools. The cost to human life will be terrible. The current lockdown is having an insignificant impact on infections, with some 10 million workers classified as key workers and some schools with over 50% of children in attendance as parents are forced to continue to work in the middle of the lockdown. The pandemic will be pushed into a new period of exponential growth by Johnson's actions, with tens of thousands of more deaths. There is much opposition amongst educators, but it is being diverted. The NEU, along with other teaching unions, have responded to Johnson's roadmap by extending a hand to the government. The NEU organised an emergency meeting with, quote, a very important announcement on the same day that the deaths had reached 100,000. The announcement was not for strike action or to fight the plans to reopen schools, but it was to announce that the union were going to donate £1 million of its membership dues to the Daily Mirror's campaign to support disadvantaged kids with providing pencils and laptops. That is, it stepped in to cover up for the government's refusal to fund the necessary support for the poorest children in society. It also announced on the same day the publication of its blueprint to reopening schools. And there is very little difference between it and the government's roadmap. Mary Boosted, the Joint Secretary of the NEU, said, "We all want schools to open, but like the Prime Minister, we want them to open when it is safe to do so. We agree with Boris Johnson that this is a balancing act. This criminal subordination of the lives of educators to this reactionary government and its insistence to defend the profit drive of capitalism has to end now." That's our position. The Educators Rank and File Safety Committee in the United Kingdom is advancing the call for independent action by workers to demand the full closure of schools and non-essential industries with full compensation to workers. These must establish links with broader sections of workers, such as transport and health workers, in a common struggle to protect lives through a general political strike. This is what has been achieved with the London bus workers and has had a very significant uptake, in opposition again to the union bureaucracy, who have acted in unison with the company to block a walkout by bus workers organised by the Rank and File Committee set up there in Cricklewood. Now, we are fighting to establish links with drivers and teachers. drivers, teachers, health workers, and broader sections of workers. And we insist that the campaign for these committees to establish links must be extended throughout Europe and internationally, as the issues that we confront are identical. I urge you to join the Rank and File Committee in the United States and extend its work both nationally and internationally in a common struggle to protect lives and livelihoods of the working class as the only progressive solution to this impasse. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Tanya. I believe we also have a contribution from Germany coming up next. Hi, we can hear you.
Very well. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to speak at this very important meeting. My name is Gregor. I'm a member of the ERFSC and a contributor for the World Socialist website. Speakers have already painted a devastating picture of the dire situation in the United States and the United Kingdom. I would like to strongly support the notion that an independent intervention of the working class is required to save countless lives. For a long time, Germany internationally has been hailed as a sort of model for how to cope with the coronavirus pandemic. These times are over. The situation in Germany, as across Europe, now resembles that of a major war. In December and January alone, Germany recorded more than 40,000 deaths, for many days surpassing the US death toll in relative terms. As hospitals and crematories became overloaded, one local politician even began praising himself for having decided in April to procure an additional freezing facility for dead bodies. In total, the past 2 months have been the deadliest in the entire 12-month period of the pandemic, which was unleashed on the world last year by the policy of malign neglect and herd immunity pursued by the ruling elites in Europe, America, and across the globe. The German capitalist elite has acted in an entirely criminal manner from the start. Even though intelligence reports and scientific advisors have left them extremely well informed about the dangers associated with the virus, they reacted only months later. And even when they did react, they made sure not to close any businesses. In fact, they have not forced a single factory or office to physically close until today. I'm very glad to be able to speak to teachers across America today, as we have fought to mobilize educators, parents, and students in Germany as well. Schools have become one of the most important focal points in the ongoing class struggle, as they play the decisive role in the ruling elite's murderous herd immunity scheme and their policy of controlled mass infection. In Germany, a year-long campaign was waged to keep schools open as long as possible and always reopen them as soon as possible. The campaign was bound up with intense propaganda efforts, ranging from fake studies about the absence of infections in schools to outright lies and cover-ups. On top of that, politicians, right-wing media pundits, and even a handful of scientists were promoted day and night, propagating the necessity of, quote, learning to live with the virus, end quote. In the last couple of days, the numbers have gone down slightly, owing mostly to the winter holidays, where most people stayed with their loved ones. The government was also forced to suspend compulsory attendance at school due to massive opposition of protesting teachers, parents, and striking students across Germany. But even as this small glimpse of hope has appeared at the horizon, government representatives of all parties are literally raging over the need to send children back to school. One state prime minister, who is a member of the Greens, delivered an outright rant on public television, shouting that primary schools would be reopened in a way that is, quote, responsible, and everyone should finally shut up about it. Indeed, the back-to-school drive is expressed in the most insidious fashion by politicians of the official left, who put forward the importance of schools for the social and psychological well-being of children, while they refrain from investing any money in even the most basic necessities of educational life. Many state governments, such as the Berlin coalition of Social Democrats, Greens, and the so-called Left Party, are responsible for years and even decades of austerity, social cuts, and privatizations. Now, the immense pressure exerted on working-class families is used as a pretext to additionally put the bare lives of these same families in danger. This homicidal policy is supported not only by all established parties in the various state governments, but also by the unions. In the beginning of the pandemic, Germany's main education union even rejected compulsory wearing of masks, while suggesting at the same time that schools can be reopened safely. The Union of Public Employees has not put forward any demands for COVID protection at all, even as they conducted contract negotiations last year. Neither of the two unions which I mentioned has called for a strike of teachers, even though a large part of teachers would have the explicit legal right to do so. The reopening of schools and daycare centers also constitutes a mechanism to force workers from unessential factories and offices back to work. The German government has emphasized that even when compulsory attendance is temporarily suspended, everyone has got the, quote, right to bring their children to school. This is aimed at stripping workers of the legal basis to demand time off from their employers. Well, facts and statistics have emerged that leave no doubt that teachers and preschool educators form the sections of the working class most endangered by COVID. The cases of a 44-year-old preschool teacher and a 38-year-old school teacher, together with hundreds of mass outbreaks at schools and kindergartens, have produced outrage and horror. One of the states suffering worst is Thuringia, which is governed by Germany's pseudo-left party. The state president has always rejected all measures to shut down the economy and has openly embraced Sweden's policy of herd immunity. He has even invited Swedish officials to discuss how to transfer that policy to the conditions of the state he governs. What is extremely worrying are the news of novel strains of coronavirus, which are now being detected in countries across the world. The German government is obviously not interested in investigating this danger, as the government has decided to only order a sequential analysis of genomes in 1 in 900 cases. Leading virologists and epidemiologists are warning that the novel strain detected in the UK may become dominant in all European countries unless, quote, there's a total lockdown across all Europe, as one of the scientists put it. This is a demand that has been raised by a paper published in The Lancet, signed by 1,000 scientists from across Europe and translated to 14 different languages. But the only social force able to realize this is the international working class. Governments, including the unions across Europe, are diametrically opposed to all such steps. I thus highly support the socialist program outlined by Evan and others. All unessential industry and business needs to be shut down with all workers compensated. Frontline workers in health, logistics, medicine production and distribution need to be protected by the best technical means available. The billions transferred to the banks and oligarchs need to be taken back and reinvested in public health and public education and other vital services. The experience of dozens of student initiatives in Germany, as well as mass movements of students in Greece, France and Poland, which have been covered extensively on the World Socialist website, show that workers and young people will be successful only to the degree in which they liberate themselves from the straitjackets of the union bureaucracies. To that end, the IYSSE and the SEP in Germany are organizing bi-weekly online meetings of students, teachers and parents to prepare for a European-wide school strike and a more broadly based general strike. This is the slogan of a major rally which we are calling on Monday, featuring representatives of student initiatives as well as international guests. Last week's meeting of our nationwide network unanimously passed a resolution from which I would like to quote the following, quote, "The pandemic is an international phenomenon and requires an international response. We stand in solidarity with the school strikes and protests in Greece, Poland and France and welcome the formation of rank and file committees in many cities in the United Kingdom and the United States. The rank and file committees must work closely together and prepare for a European-wide school strike, end quote. So this could be extended to say that we, of course, stand in solidarity as well to the teacher strikes in Chicago. And I think this goes to show how similar and connected our respective fights are. I therefore want to close my remarks by calling on all educators, parents, and students listening in today to continue to form rank and file committees, fight for socialism, and take steps to organize a general strike across the continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gregor. So I want to, we will probably not be able to get to everyone who has their hands up. To remind you, we have roughly 180 people on this call, and I'm seeing quite a few hands. So I apologize if we don't get to everyone today. But I would like to next call on Zach to discuss the question of rank and file committees. A few questions have come in on organizing those. So Zach.
Well, thank you. My name is Zach Corrigan. I'm a writer for the World Socialist website, and I'm active in the Michigan Educators Rank and File Safety Committee. I just wanted to, as David said, explain a little bit more about the context within which we're building these rank and file committees and why they're necessary. And in doing so, I'd like to review some of the recent experiences of the class struggle, in particularly the class struggle of educators in the United States, because I think there are important lessons here, and it will help explain sort of the impetus behind this. But in 2018, you're looking at them now, West Virginia educators struck statewide. The 55 counties in West Virginia, the poorest state in the country, struck, and they filled the Capitol building for day after day like this, demanding improved wages and health care. Now, this is inside, the picture you're looking at is inside of the Capitol building in Charleston, West Virginia. You can see the same building here in the background of this picture. These are telecommunications workers at Frontier Communications. They were on strike. This picture was taken the same day. The teachers are in that building, and the Frontier strikers are out here, and their unions are we're not uniting them. They never brought these two strikes together. Even you could literally see from one picket line to the other. So that was what was going on in West Virginia in 2018. The strike of the teachers, these teachers, broke out completely independently of the union. Among teachers who organized themselves in Facebook Messenger groups, and they met in person independently of the union and decided that they were going to launch a mass walkout, and that's what they did. And these were this slide shows pictures of other teacher strikes that took place across the country. Many of them statewide strikes. In the upper left, that's Arizona. In the upper right, that's Oakland, California. The bottom right is actually Oakland students. We'll talk about the students in a minute. They came out to support their teachers. And the bottom left is Oklahoma. But these swept the nation in 2018 and 2019. And they were not united. The existing trade unions, Randy Weingarten, the president of the AFT, who is a millionaire, who is on the Democratic National Committee, she literally flew around the country in 2018 to shut down these statewide strikes and not unite them. So this is Chicago teachers right here. These Chicago teachers went on strike in 2019. I took this picture actually. I was there with a reporting team from the World Socialist website, and we were calling on teachers to broaden the strike into a general strike. That was what I remember what we were saying that day. In the end, their strike was not broadened. It was isolated into only Chicago, even though teachers across the country, as we saw on the previous slide, had been striking over the same issues in the year leading up to it, and it was defeated, like the other ones. Now, these are pictures of other workers, not teachers, from the one on the left is Matamoros, Mexico, which was taken 2019. Before the pandemic, and they had a general strike there. Matamoros is a city of 1 million people that's on the border of the United States. It's in Mexico, just across the border from Texas, and I'm sure no one ever heard about this general strike of 70,000 people that shook the auto industry in North America, because it was covered up by the media. But we covered it. We wrote about this, and we brought the news of this strike to workers across the United States and internationally. On the bottom right, that's Santiago, Chile in 2019. In the upper right, that's actually India this year. Masses of workers entering into struggle all over the world. That's the point I'm trying to make here. This is the context within which we're having this meeting even right now. Evan referred to this chart earlier, which shows, I mean, this is such a striking chart, but it just shows this is the class divide that we're talking about. There are the Democrats and the Republicans are fighting to open the schools in order to maintain what you're seeing here, the green, which is the endlessly rising stock market. But the red here, those are the deaths, and you can see they're rising together throughout the year of 2020. And they're still rising. This chart expires at the end of 2020. But the unions are tied to the Democratic Party, which is tied to the stock market, and they are not going to wage a struggle to keep the schools closed. In fact, they're doing nothing to fight against Trump's coup. They're doing nothing to oppose the efforts of the right wing to demand that there not be any lockdowns. So they're not fighting for workers. Workers need their own organizations of struggle. And so I wanted to just make the point, actually, that in West Virginia in 2018, if workers at that point had rank and file committees like we have now, like we are building now, and they were connected, they had lines of communication established between themselves and teachers in other states and cities, if they had lines of communication opened up between themselves and workers in other industries, like we're talking about, and if they had organizations that they controlled which were dedicated to the defense of the rights of the workers, then I wonder where we would actually be today with regards to the pandemic and with regards to what developed out of the 2018, 2019 teachers movement, because things would have turned out very differently if that movement had not been able to be shut down by the trade unions, and if workers had had independent organizations. So right now, the situation we're in is that there's a fascist movement being built up to force the reopening of schools and industries. And the defense against this is the building of rank and file committees of workers so that they can take control of the situation in the schools. They can leverage the immense power of other sections of the working class by reaching out to auto workers and healthcare workers. In Michigan, auto workers, where we have a committee, by the way, a rank and file committee at auto plants in Michigan, they shut down production in March after their union forced them to go to work under unsafe conditions. It shut down the whole auto industry for months. And this is the power of the working class that we're harnessing here. Now, the meeting we're on right now has 170 some people on it right now. And I'm just scanning sort of the list of people who are on. We have representatives from Washington State, Oregon, California, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Missouri, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, West Virginia, Tennessee, Arkansas, Texas, Louisiana, Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Washington, D.C., Maryland, Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, as well as 3 territories in Canada, Connecticut, Massachusetts as well. And we also already heard from England and Germany on the call. I see we have teachers from Hawaii and Alaska joining us on this call. So this is an immense social force that can be leveraged to, we talked on this meeting about how the logic of developments is toward a general strike. All sections of the working class in this country and internationally they're dying by the millions from a pandemic that could be stopped and contained, except that that runs counter to the profit interests of the ruling elite. And but the potential, the power that we really have if we can organize it and unite behind a political program to defend the rights of workers, that's immense. And I think if teachers had these organizations 2 years ago, the situation today might be totally different. The pandemic might actually not have might be done if teachers had and workers had organizations that were able to shut down the industry in an organized way and refuse to return to work under unsafe conditions. We could be out of this by now. Now, on top of the pandemic, we also have the threat of a fascist movement. So I think, I just want to say, I think there's an urgent need to build these committees, but the potential is enormous, and we're doing all that we can to facilitate the building of these. I just want to, I know I've spoken too long already, but I want to show you briefly the website that we have, which if you go to wsws.org/edsafety, this is what you see. This is today's meeting, of course, but you can also join our rank and file committee. You can read about our demands. You can read statements of other rank and file committees. I think this is extraordinary, actually, this part of our website, because we have committees being written from Pennsylvania, the UK. Felicia Gladstone is a auto plant in the Midwest. We have Texas, New York, Chicago, Amazon workers rank and file committee statement right here on the upper right. And this is just the last 10 or so. We have dozens and dozens of statements and things that have been written by committees literally all over the world. Teachers, London bus drivers who were mentioned earlier at this meeting. And what these statements are calls. I mean, we're calling on, we don't address ourselves to the school boards or the unions, of course, or the state. I mean, we know that the power of the working class is in ourselves and in other sections of workers. The Michigan educators launched with a call to unite with educators, auto workers, and healthcare workers. And they actually broke it down in here. These are the three, here, where is it? The three largest sections of workers in Michigan are those, and what a powerful force that would be if it was organized into committees like this. I mean, the situation is developing toward a general strike, and teachers and other sections of workers need to prepare for it. They need organizations that they control, and that's what this is about. So I hope that has been helpful, I guess, in answering some questions. I'd like to turn it back over to David.
I would like to call on as the final speaker, Jerry White. I apologize that we weren't able to get to everyone today. I think this has been a very good meeting. But Jerry, could you please give the final comments?
Yes, thank you very much, David. This has been an extraordinary meeting. We've heard today from teachers and supporters from Alabama, Chicago, New York, Michigan, United Kingdom, Germany. We've heard from a Los Angeles area nurse, a Baltimore Amazon worker. We've had auto workers on this call. And in each of their remarks, of course, we're painting a picture which is identical the world over. There are now 2.2 million who have succumbed to this disastrous disease. There are 440,000 deaths within the United States. And that is an expression of the class structure of the capitalist system that we live in. That is a social system, for whatever the claims about we're all in this together and the concerns about safe reopening of schools. It is an economic and social system which sacrifices human life, every other aspect of life, to the never-ending accumulation of private wealth by a tiny handful of society. 650 billionaires in the United States have seen their private fortunes rise by $1 trillion to a total of $4 trillion during the pandemic, as millions died across the world. These are pandemic profiteers. The Jeff Bezos of Amazon, Tyson, the meatpacking king, Elon Musk, who led a campaign against any lockdowns whatsoever. Now, of course, millions in the United States and millions throughout the world had a certain sense of relief after the shock of Trump's shock troops carrying out the storming of the Capitol, to see that he finally was removed from office. Of course, he has not gone far, and he's continuing to plot. The Republicans everywhere from state houses to the U.S. Congress are promoting the most right-wing, fascistic, neo-Nazi, white supremacist elements who were all mobilized on the basis of no lockdowns, no restrictions on any business activity, that the lives of millions just have to be infected because you can't have any impediment to profit making. So millions, of course, were relieved, but we now have a Biden administration. And the fact of the matter is that Biden answers to the same class, economic, business, capitalist interests as the Republicans. Their tactics might be different. The Democrats tend to rely on the trade unions to impose the dictates of capital, but they represent the same class interests. Biden has said 660,000 Americans will die before we turn the corner. Nothing can be done about it. He rejects lockdowns. He rejects the closing of schools. Just the opposite. He is speeding ahead with it. And why? It's not because they care about the emotional problems or educational problems of children. There is one purpose, and he said it very clearly. We have to put millions of people back to work. All of those mothers and fathers that are home taking care of their children rather than go to work even when they can work. And what is it all about? They spent trillions of dollars bailing out Wall Street, this immense speculative bubble financed through the Federal Reserve, pouring trillions in. Well, they want the working class to pay for that through exploiting us in the factories and other workplaces, because it is only the collective labor of the working class that actually creates real value, not the speculation on GameStop and all of these other mad, frenzied speculation. No, it's the labor of the working class that creates all of society's wealth. So they want to make us pay for this massive bailout. There is enormous social anger building up. The Hunts Point strike was just a certain barometer, an early indication. There is enormous social anger. Now, what is the role of the unions? What is the role of the Democratic Socialists of America? They tell workers and teachers to expend our energy appealing to the powers that be, to the Democratic Party, to those that represent a different class. Maybe we can appeal to their conscience. Maybe they'll change their minds. No, they won't. We set up these rank and file committees so that the energies of teachers and workers and others can be guided to our real allies, to appeal to our brothers and sisters in every industry around the world, because we all have the same class interests: to protect lives, to reallocate the resources away from the pandemic billionaires and use it for the common good, to have mass vaccinations, mass testing, mass resources for remote only, to shut down schools and non-essential production and guarantee the income of all working people, protect the small businesses that are being wiped out. That is, we are fighting for equality. And whether it's Trump and the Republicans that scream about the danger of socialism, or the Democratic Party, which defends the same corporate interests, their greatest fear is the working class and the growing support for social equality, for socialism. Now, I just want to conclude the sisters who spoke from Alabama, who spoke about the problems that teachers confront are the problems the Hyundai workers confront, the Mercedes-Benz workers, the grocery store workers, the Walmart workers. It is absolutely true. It will not be the unions, however, that unite. The unions are united with the powers that be and the capitalist system. We have to build these committees to unite the working class, to use the immense strength that we have. The great Russian revolutionary leader Leon Trotsky once spoke about the power, the growing anger of the working class as the building up of steam. But he said, without a guiding organization, the energy of the masses would dissipate like steam not enclosed in a piston box. But nevertheless, he said, what moves things is not the piston or the box, but the steam. This buildup of social anger has to be organized, politically directed. We have to know who our allies are, who our enemies are, and we have to unite the working class in a powerful opposition. I want to urge everyone on this call to send your information at wsws.org/edsafety to learn more about and to build rank and file committees. I want to ask everyone on this call to donate to the World Socialist website and our New Year Fund. The WSWS has been the voice of educators and the whole working class. It has exposed what is really happening and been the basis of an organization to fight. And finally, I want to urge you to join the Socialist Equality Party. That is the organization that the working class needs, the leadership that the working class needs for this struggle. So I'd like to bring the meeting to a close. We will certainly announce the future meetings of this, but in the meantime, what is really critical is to build and expand our rank and file committees. Teachers in Alabama and Chicago, to issue your own open letters to the workers of your cities to fight, to rally them the necessary support to save lives against this murderous policy of return to school.